Okay, let's talk about getting rugby back, shall we? In this part of the world, obviously, Super Rugby's being played in front of crowds at the moment. We look upon that with very envious eyes, don't we? But you've got a potentially very busy autumn to come with a backdrop of big financial concerns. Can you just give us an update, Bill, on where your discussions are at the moment? I guess both in terms of getting the pro game back at club level and in terms of Test match rugby.
Yeah, there's two components to that as well. Obviously, we're keen to get the professional game back up and running as quickly as we can, and we're in and have been in regular discussions with PRL. We sit on various different working groups, medical groups, and have conversations with government on a regular basis. The clubs have gone back to training, as you know. Most of them started on June the 8th, some started June the 15th, and the Premiership are aiming for a start date of August the 15th. We don't know how long that will be at the moment. And you'll have EPCI, you'll have the European competition in there as well. And of equal importance to us is getting the community game up and running as quickly as possible. You've got a lot of clubs out there who are desperate to open their clubhouses, to start generating revenue within there. So it's really important that we get both of those going. As I've said, the Premiership is aiming to start on August the 15th. We've got outstanding international matches. We've got the final round of the Six Nations, obviously, against Italy, which could be an important game. We could be going for a championship title there, so that's important for us. And we've got some other internationals that we'd like to play in that October-November window as well. So we're just working at the moment with PRL in terms of how they're scheduled. How can we both achieve what we need to do out of salvaging something out of this season?
What's your preference of what the autumn looks like from your point of view, assuming the club game does restart on August 15th, as you say? But in terms of when we get to the autumn Test match window, what you mentioned, a festival of rugby that could be an 8-team tournament. Is that what you'd ideally like to see?
Yeah, so our original preference was to continue playing the Southern Hemisphere nations, and it was their preference as well. I would say that's unlikely at the moment. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely at the moment. And if the South doesn't come up here, then we would put together some form of tournament, which would be Six Nations and probably two invited guests, two other nations or two other teams to come in and involve with that. And we're having discussions around that at the moment. The window's closing, so we need to make a decision on that and firm those up by first or second week of July. So that's moving quite quick, in terms of confirming the logistics and the operation side of it and selling tickets and whatever. We'd need to mid-July, I think, is probably our cutoff date to make a decision there. But at the moment, I would say the most likely option will be a Six Nations tournament along with two other invited sides.
Let's talk about trying to align the global game, shall we? That's sort of been the buzzword, hasn't it, of off-field rugby discussions for a long, long time. Your New Zealand Rugby Union counterpart, Mark Robertson, said he hopes for more compromise out of last week's World Rugby meeting, where you were joined by clubs as well as the stakeholders. Would you agree with that? Because it seemed that there wasn't as much progress made at that meeting that you might have hoped for.
The process is quite nice. So this kicked off back in March at a World Rugby meeting in Paris, and the leagues were there as well. So PRL attended that meeting as well. And it was decided back then that a working group would be set up to revisit and relook at the global calendar situation. So a group of 6 people put together. You've got the CEO of Wales, Martin Phillips. You've got myself. You've got the CEO of Nations, Ben Morrell, of South Africa and New Zealand. And that working group was delegated a responsibility of what could be an appropriate calendar, but in discussion with the clubs as well. So the first call we made when we came back from Paris was to PRL to get their input into how a calendar could work, what were the options there, what would work for the club game. We carried on those conversations through April, and then there becomes a sort of diminishing returns in terms of how much input you can give. And then we said, okay, and actually PRL said, why don't you just go away now, finish off your discussions with the Southern Hemisphere, come back to us with what options you can align there between South, and then we'll look at that situation. We'll get into a deeper consultation around how the club game could not get that. So that's the situation we're in now. This is an issue that's plagued the game for probably for 25 years from when the game went professional in 95. If you were to start with a blank sheet of paper now, your least option would probably be what it is currently, the status quo. So what we're trying to do here is actually something which is better for both the clubs and for the unions. And we see an opportunity here to separate the club game calendar away from the international calendar, which is better for the fans, better for the players, the game overall commercially as well. So that's the situation and the phase we're at now. It needs now more deep consultation with the club and financial modelling around that. Probably two issues: the financial modelling of any potential shift, but also how does this work for player welfare? Because if you consolidate that, if you take away the July tour and you move that month into October, November, and you have then October, November as an international window for a more meaningful tournament, then there are questions about does that work for the players? And the players have been involved in this as well. So we've had the head of the Global Players Union, Omar, has been involved in any World Rugby debriefings, and we've also in parallel been consulting with England players as well on how that structure could look.
So how are the decisions ultimately going to be made on this? How is a solution going to be found?
So as I say, we're now into a deeper level of consultation. The French will do it in France and we'll do it in England. There'll probably be another working group set up, which will have representation on there for both clubs and unions going forward. And as I say, the pressing issues are making absolutely sure it works from a welfare point of view. And secondly, some more detailed financial modelling around what it means to shift competitions and to shift seasons, and making sure that it works for all involved.
There's going to have to be compromise somewhere, isn't there? There's going to have to be, someone's going to have to give a little. And if the clubs, like they did last week, said no to summer rugby and no to the shifting calendar, if that's what they said, I mean, do tell us. But, how are you going to get them to climb down? How are you going to get them to come on board with your idea?
Well, I think it has to work for both sides. I mean, whatever we do here, clearly, if it doesn't work for one of the sides, then it's going to be very difficult to implement it. So it has to make sense for both sides of it. You always come back down to one fundamental issue, which is unique to rugby union. It's the only sport in the world that has this challenge. Not even football doesn't have this. But you've got a core group of international players, the stars of the game, and at the moment, if you go through to the final of a Premiership, that's 24 matches. If you play a full European competition, that's 9 matches. So you've got 33 matches there. The international schedule is 11 matches, so you're up to 44. And by the time you've got player preparation, probably need a year that's got 65 weeks in it. So, and the length of the year. So you've really got two options. You either dramatically reduce the number of games, but then you some revenue opportunities that get invested back in, or you find a way to manage the calendar. And we currently have a system in place where those players can only play a maximum number of games. So there's a maximum of games a season, but you lay out the calendar in such a way that that minimum of that minority of players, who are those core international players, their welfare is managed much more directly, and they're getting the right levels of, and they're playing the important games for the clubs, and they're playing the important games for the international side as well. And that's the direction that we are proposing and putting forward, and it has to be it has to be now a deeper consultation in terms of whether that works for both sides.
So, without being binary about it, is this England Rugby promoting, endorsing, championing summer rugby?
No, we've actually, the initial idea around summer rugby came from the clubs, and that was a full summer rugby season, so going right through the summer. We're not actually saying that. So one of the options on the table that we're discussing is that the club game would start in December and it would go through to July. And we currently play, as you know, play right through to the end of June. But you'd have a situation there where the community game would start in September, as it currently does. You'd then have October, November, you'd have an international tournament. You'd have the club game start in December, which is a critical month for them. You've got the big games, you've got the Boxing Day games and Christmas games and so on, New Year's games and so on. You'd start off with that. You go through, that allows you to play 8 rounds before you get to a Six Nations February, March. You play Six Nations club game and then the club game would come back after the end of the Six Nations and have an unbroken stretch, a very long unbroken stretch through until July. And we believe July is a good month in which to hold finals and so on. So we don't see it as being playing all the way through the summer. That's just on the table, and that has to be costed out and gone into in some detail by both sides. And there are other options that play around that as well.
So on that, and you might say I'm creating a link that isn't there. If you therefore are saying the community game is going to stay September to April as it stands now, and the professional club game might shift December through to July, am I saying 2 + 2 = 5 here? Relegation, ring fencing has to take place. You're making a complete split. There's a huge divide now taking place. I know there's not a huge trickle through effect from players in lower clubs shifting up, but that bridge seems to be, that drawbridge is being pulled up, it seems, and it's a now when, not if, ring fencing takes place.
Yeah, it's a really emotive topic, as you know, and schools of thought, and so on the one hand, the aspirational values of sport say that you need promotion, relegation, and the game is built on promoting and progressing through the leagues. And a lot of people look at the Exeter model and say, look, you've got to enable a club like an Exeter who've come in and done an amazing job, and they've created the right environment, they've got the right facilities, and they can compete in the Premiership. So you shouldn't close that off. And that's very understandable. And the structure of the English game is built upon promotion and relegation. On the other hand, there's another school of thought that says, well, actually, the gulf now between the Premiership and the Championship is not closing. It's getting wider and wider as each season goes by. We've seen in the last 5 years, whichever team gets relegated bounces straight back up. And I think Newcastle won all 19 of their games before the Championship was halted due to COVID. So there are some saying, well, actually, that gulf now is to such an extent that you don't really have a level playing field in terms of those teams being able to compete and come up into the Premiership. There's also the financial argument for sealing it off in terms of the ability to give those Premiership of not being relegated, which costs a lot of money. It costs about $5 million if you're relegated for a Newcastle, so that's not insignificant. So how do you safeguard that to promote and develop a more robust Premiership? So, and there's very subjective views then in terms of, well, if you don't have the threat of relegation, actually you don't have the pressure on towards the end of the season to play not to lose. You can go out and play to win, and you can try younger players, be more experimental, and so on. But then there are other issues like, well, okay, if that's the situation, how do you stop? What happens if you've got one team which is perennially underperforming and is way adrift of the rest, and how do you address that? And if somebody else does come along and has the capability and the means and the wherewithal, and it's not inexpensive to get into the Premiership, how would you accompany that? So it's quite a complex topic, and it raises very emotional and strong points of view, which is absolutely fair. So on that one, again, we look at all different options there and see how that works in the best structure of the game overall.
Well, Bill, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much for outlining all that and answering all those questions for us. I guess one final one is, and if you could just give us your personal opinion here, fly on the wall, I don't know, 2 years' time, if you're a betting man, what does the game look like? Where are we going to be at?
I can never have a personal point of view because it becomes non-personal very quickly. But I would say if you had a wish or a desire, take me out 3 years because we'll have won a World Cup by then as well. So that would be quite nice. You'd have a domestic season where there's a clear separation between the club game and the international game. The fans get it, they understand it, they see the difference between the two. We have the best domestic club game in the world. We then have an improved regional club product, which drives more money into the game. And perhaps by that stage, there's a global club cup as well. And that fits into a calendar that then also enables you to have a 11 matches of the international game, and they're broken into 2 very clear separated windows. You've got the Six Nations tournament, which is the jewel in the crown of global rugby tournaments, I would say, and that's protected and it's going well and it's driving. And then you have a meaningful competition in the October-November window, which involves the Northern and Southern Hemisphere, but has also brought the Tier 2 game in there as well. So they've got a way of accessing that. So you see the growth and development of Tier 2 nations, which is critical for the game overall. And you see a domestic league, which is financially sustainable. And we have a university academies program running, where we're getting fresh young talent coming into the English game, but they have a safety net in terms of education and a career in addition to playing rugby. And then I think that wouldn't be bad if we could do that. That would be quite nice.
Bring
Bill
on the
Sweeney's
tooth fairy.
Rugby West. I love it.
I know, that's all there is to it.